I lived in Rochester, Minnesota, and this happened in 2019 when I was about 8 to 10 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night and it was around 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. I heard some jingling like keys, like the stuff you use for shaman, so I got up and went down the hallway slowly. I thought my dad had just got back home from work in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, but when I got closer to the refrigerator, the jingling stopped. That's when I got scared, but then again, I wanted to go closer, and so I did. In the darkness, I saw a shadow waving back at me, and I waved back at it because I thought it was my dad. The next day, I told my mom and brothers what I saw last night, but then my mom told me that it wasn't my dad because my dad was still in Minneapolis. This scared me and I thought about who it was that waved at me yesterday. A few years later, we moved out of the house and later found out that there used to be a lady who lived there. She had killed her husband and kids in that house and then killed herself. About a month before the email incident, because of the rearranging of our office spaces, we had to move to the other side of the building. A coworker and I found some webcams and were messing with it. We had set them up to take pictures whenever there was any movement. He had 2 on 2 computers, I had 2 on 1 computer, so in total we had 4. At first, I set mine to take 45-second clips for any detective movement. He did the same too. I had a motive because ever since we moved to the other side of the building, my dry erase board had been falling down to one side. It is hung on the cubicle wall with 2 hooks. One hook keeps it detaching and falling. It was odd because it takes a good amount of force to detach the dry erase board from the hook. I was showing my coworker and our boss by hitting down on the board and it wouldn't even budge. So, one day, after we had set up the cameras, we went home. The next day, we come in and I found out that our cameras had been triggered. My dry erase board had fallen down on the side that it usually fell down to. After reviewing the videos, we found that there was something, but because the cameras took too long to actually start recording after something triggers it, it just saw my board was already down. The camera didn't catch anything causing it to fall. I then started to ask some of the people who were there with the company for a longer time. One of the older ladies said that there was a lady who was in the next cubicle over who died somewhat of a tragic death. Her car rolled over her in the driveway, and that lady used to be friends with the lady in my cubicle. The only problem was, the lady had gotten into an argument about a month before the lady had died. The two never got along after that day, and they were pretty bitter towards one another. A couple of months later, the lady in my cubicle retired and just went away without saying anything to anyone. It is said by others who work alone late at night or on the weekends that they hear things too, but never think of anything. I think it's probably the lady who died trying to get back at the lady who was in my cubicle. She's probably thinking that whoever is in that cubicle is the lady. I think most elders know about this story, but because of the Hmong Gossip Network, the story has changed. Parts are missing or added as the story goes from person to person, so nobody knows if it's true or not. But this is the version that I heard. Also, the original version I heard was supposed to be from Laos, but recently I heard someone else say that it happened to a person in Thailand. So who knows? Anyways, on to the story. Supposedly, there was this guy who went hunting and saw a bunzong and caught it. It is said that you need to hold onto the bunzong's arm and not look away. If you looked away or blinked, the creature would replace its arm with a log or something and it would run away. Anyways, once you catch it, the idea is to not look away. I'm not sure how he got the bunzong home without looking. Maybe he had friends with them, I'm not too sure. But anyways, he got it home and rounded up his family and friends and fellow villagers. They dug a hole and filled it up with cow manure and put the bunzong in the pit. There were people around the entire time watching the creature so that it couldn't replace its arm with something else and take off. It is said that if you put a bunzong in cow manure for 3 days and 3 nights, it will turn back to a normal person. I haven't heard of the shedding of its skin, but from what I heard, the Bunzong turns from a creature back into a normal human being. Well, after the friends, family, and villagers watched this creature for 3 days and 3 nights, it slowly turned into a young lady. The young lady was said to be very beautiful with long black hair but pale and bluish skin. Her skin was pretty cold to the touch. Supposedly, somebody married the lady and later they had a perfectly normal human baby. That lady is still said to be alive somewhere. This was about 20 or 30 years ago. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. This one happened in California, so if you know close relatives of these people, you should have already heard about this one. There was a group of hunters who went hunting. That night, they camped out. There was an owl that landed on a dried-out tree near their camp and started hooting. One of the guys came out of the tent to take a piss in the middle of the night. The guy was annoyed by the owl, so he said in a low voice, "Stupid owl, gonna keep everybody up." The owl asked the guy in Hmong what they were doing there. He answered that they were hunting out for deer. The owl told the guy that they shouldn't come back. The guy didn't think of anything and went back into his tent. The owl kept on hooting the whole night. This time, the guys came out with their rifles and shot at the owl. One of them hit the owl and it fell to the ground. When it fell though, it was as if a 50-ton boulder hit the ground. The guys took the owl and cooked half of it on the following day. The other half they took it home. Anyways, as they were boiling it, no matter how long they cooked it, the meat would never cook. Despite this, all the hunters ate the meat. When they came back home from their hunting trip, the guy who shot the owl died. They found out that something had pulled out his intestines through his bottom and ate it. The rest of the group started to get sick. One of the guys, however, managed to take the leftover half of the owl to a monk to examine. Immediately, the monk knew exactly what it was. It was a creature that they called the Pinyu Vai. The monk told the guy what to bring back to help save the guy's life, and so he did, and the guy who brought the leftovers survived. As for the other guys, it was too late. The Pinyu Vai had already killed them by the time they got back. Anyways, what the monk told the guy was that the owl was just an object that the Pinyu Vai used to replace itself. The real Pinyu Vai wasn't even there. When the hunter shot the Pinyu Vai had already taken the guy's life. He just didn't even know it, and that's why he was able to shoot the owl. It is said that if you are suspicious that a Pinyu Vai is after you, you need to take any green leaf and stick it up your bottom. When the creature tries to take your intestines and eat it, it will see the leaf, which means that some other Pinyu Vai had already eaten your intestines. Then it won't bother you. Also, the thing to know about a Pinyu Vai is that it never comes to you on a first visit. The actual creature never comes first. It always sends an object as itself. If you challenge it, it will already have had you. But if you defeat the first object by the rules of nature, then it will come as a fiercer object next. If you can defeat that second object, then you'll be faced with the actual Pinyu Vai. In this case, the guys shot the first object only, which was an owl. They thought they got the real thing. That's a weird story. Why did that happen in California? They made a monk, and why were they not freaked out that an owl talked to them? It always seems that there are stories regarding highway rest areas. I'm sure most of you have heard the ones where guys are picking up one or more girls alongside the highway or at a rest area and then trying to ditch her later. Well, this one is about a rest area as well, but not about picking anybody up. One of my cousins was driving home late one night from an out-of-town visit. There were other people in their cars as well, but everybody was already asleep. It was quite late, so my cousin was becoming very tired. They were coming up on a rest area, and she decided to stop by for a restroom break and wash her face. Maybe that would wake her up. She pulled into the rest area, and since the others were asleep, she went in all by herself. The place was empty. She went and did her business in one of the stalls and came out to wash her hands and face. She bent down towards the sink to wash her face. As she started to stand straight, she looked into the mirror and she saw a person behind her. The person that she saw was all white and dead-looking. It looked like a corpse, and the thing was just staring straight at her through the mirror. She gasped in fear, but as soon as she blinked, the person disappeared. My cousin quickly ran out and jumped into her car and took off into the night. I do believe that if someone dearly close to you passes away, they'll visit you in your dreams to say their farewell. My mother that passed away visited my brother in his dream. In his dream, he woke up and walked from his bedroom to the kitchen to grab some water. To get to the kitchen, you have to walk through the living room. As he walked out of his bedroom and into the living room, he saw our mother laying on the floor in the dead Hmong clothes. My brother got spooked because he knew that she was no longer with us in the real world, but for some reason, why is she laying on the floor? My brother decided to brush it off and continue to the kitchen to grab his drink. As he was walking back to his bedroom, he had to walk past the living room again, but this time, our mother stood up and had her hands up. Imagine those Chinese jumping zombies with their arms straight towards you, and instead of them walking, they hop towards you. That was exactly what my mother was doing, and she was getting closer and closer to my brother. He was cornered and had nowhere to go. When my mother reached him, she put her arms around him and hugged him. She didn't say a word, but in the dream, my brother knew that she was leaving. He broke down into tears and hugged her back. This was when my brother woke up and noticed his pillow sheets were soaking wet from his actual tears. During the summer, I was in Madison, Wisconsin for a funeral, and later on that night, my uncles invited us back to spend the night at his house. It was nice of my uncle, but I had other plans since I hardly visited Madison. Earlier that day, I had contacted a girl I met a few months before this trip. The girl had invited me to spend the night at her place and that we should go catch a movie together. So I told my dad and my uncle that I won't be spending the night with them because some old friends had invited me to hang out and spend the night at their place. You sly devil. Anyways, I arrived at the girl's house and her younger sister was over because she was gonna babysit her son, who was 4 years old at the time. She introduced me to her sister, and then we left for a movie. After the movie and dinner, we came back and her sister took off because it was getting late. So we popped in a movie and cuddled on a sofa. Somehow I fell asleep and was awakened by a noise. It was a cat-like meow coming from the kitchen, and someone was digging through the trash bin. I reached inside of my pocket and pulled out my phone to use it as some sort of light to see who it was in the kitchen, but still couldn't see anything. I then decided to roll off the sofa and whisper out who was there, and in an instant, a white blur bolted from out of the kitchen window. At that moment, I knew what was up ahead and was spooked. So I grabbed my shirt, wallet, keys, and slipped on my shoes and ran out to the car. Later on that morning, the girl texted me why I left so early and didn't say goodbye. I lied to her, telling her that my dad called me that morning and I had to leave. Then I finally built up the courage to ask her if her son was up in the middle of the night in the kitchen. Her response was that it couldn't be him because he was sleeping next to her the whole night. So I told her that I heard some noise coming from the kitchen and thought that it would be him. Well, she finally told me the truth, that about a year ago, her parents rented out the house to a Hmong family, and one of the daughters passed away, so the family had moved out. After her divorce, she needed a place to stay for the time being, so she asked her parents if she could move in until she finds a place of her own. I had an aunt that passed away not too long after she suffered many illnesses. My parents flew here for the funeral since I was the only child in the area. I chauffeured them to their destination in a different city. Later in the evening, since it was too dark and late to drive, my parents forbade me from making the 2-hour trip home alone. My parents went and slept at a maternal uncle's home while I decided to sleep over with my cousins after the first day's service ended. I figured my cousins were going through a tough time and I wanted to be there with them. Since they were Christians, there was no one there to cover and watch over to Hmong. It was just my uncle, my cousins, and myself. That night, after staying up late, chatting and catching up, I decided to share a bed with my second oldest cousin in her room since she had the space. She was my aunt's favorite daughter because she was a homebody and always listened to her mom. She took really good care of my aunt through her days of dialysis and surgeries and was the one there with her when she passed away. I was so tired that as soon as my cousin turned off the light, I closed my eyes and fell asleep under the covers. Then what seemed like only moments went by when I felt the mattress at the foot of my bed start to sink. I could hear the springs squeak as though a slow, constant pressure was pressed into the mattress, like it was someone sitting there. I realized how cold the air was in the room and all the hairs on my arms had shot up. It felt like someone or something was in the room with us. I scooted my body over to my cousin and gently shook her arm, but she didn't wake up. I heard her snoring and knew for sure she was asleep, and even more, that it wasn't her at the foot of the bed. I closed my eyes and buried myself under the covers, thinking that if it were my aunt, she would never hurt me. She was always kind and caring and probably wanted to come by to see us before she left. After what seemed like an eternity, I felt the spring squeak and the foot of the mattress leveled up. Then the coolness of the air also left as well. For weeks after I came home, I couldn't get my aunt's image out of my mind. There she was, laying in her coffin, dressed in white, evident makeup on her face with pink lipstick. At night, I had the TV and all my lights on. Over a month had passed by before I could turn off my TV and fall asleep. Then, slowly, it was just the lamp on my nightstand that remained on to help me see throughout the night. I never told anyone about this experience. Now when I go to funerals, I never go up to the coffin and look inside. Some years ago, about 4 older Hmong folks came from out of town to enjoy the 4th of July tournament event in Minnesota. While they were here visiting relatives and hanging around outside, a bird flew and landed on the head of one of them. The man got very disappointed and mad at the bird for doing such a thing to him that he grabbed at the bird and killed it by smashing it. A few days before they were about to drive back home, somehow the incident bothered the person who killed the bird so much that they decided to seek out a shaman about it. As they were at the shaman's house, sitting in front of his altar, talking to him about it, a plate that the shaman had placed on the altar suddenly flew down and smashed upon the floor in front of them as if somebody threw it down. They were all very startled by it and didn't know how it could have happened by itself. So the shaman did some more ritual investigations into the matter and came up with a solution for them: to wait out and not return home on the day that they had planned to go back. For some reason, the 4 of them didn't take the shaman's advice very seriously and didn't think anything was going to happen to them, so they went back home as they planned. However, they didn't quite make it back home. Their car somehow went off the highway road and smashed really hard against a concrete bridge and killed all 4 of them. Some people finally drove by and discovered them already dead in the early morning hours.